Hithersay, can you hear and see me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Excellent. Just picking up on some evidence you gave earlier about debt. When applications were made to clear debt by applicants, is it right that those would all have been decided by the trustees because they fell outside the office guidelines?
Yes, that's correct.
And so your recollection, I think, is what you said in evidence earlier, was that often those applications were dealt with by way of loan rather than by way of single grant.
That is correct.
And can you recall whether or not there was any policy or any written guidelines for the trustees setting out when applications for debt should be acceded to and in what form, i.e. loan or grant?
No, I can't, because I don't believe there were any guidelines. It is my recollection, from my understanding, that it was equity share that was suggested originally and in very early cases, and that subsequently we received a recommendation from our solicitors, Paisner and Co., that we should either give a grant or a loan with a charge on the property, and that we were, under the trust deed, able to do either of those things. But equity shares, I don't believe they ever completely stopped, but they were not the best way to deal with the situation with hindsight.
Can we look at MACF 5065_059? So this is a letter from you to the, or from, sorry, from, not from you, from Macfarlane, to the, I believe they're your auditors, Pinkney Keith Gibbs, about loans and secured advances. And it says in the second paragraph, following the above review, further to your letter, I went through the nominal ledger accounts. This is from Rodney Shepherd, finance, your finance man, in some detail, and have also reviewed the entries on the individual purchase ledger accounts. Following the above review, and having checked the outcome with Anne, we now have 3 schedules with details of individuals involved in the 3 types of loans made. And then he sets out the schedules. Now, the first of the schedule, which I'm not going to take you to, is the equity share schedule. The second schedule, which I am going to take you to, is at page 3, please, Shimak, is the legal charge loans. And if we can make that a bit bigger, you can see at the top legal charge loans, and then the value is on the right. And then there are 3 legal charge loans ranging between £6,000 and £10,000. Are those loans that were secured on property by way of a legal charge?
If it comes under the heading of legal charge loans, then yes, they would have been.
And then if we can go over the page to the third category of loans, and we've got their exchange of letter loans, and we can see down the right-hand side there are a number of loans there, ranging between £2,048 at the bottom up to just £4,775. And we can see in the middle column reference, it says from advances on 2 of those loans. Would we understand, are you able to tell us whether or not it means the other loans are not from advances, or would all of these exchange of letter loans be from advances? from advances on regular pay?
No, I think only the ones that where it says from advances. The others would have been loans granted as a loan with some kind of a repayment schedule attached.
And so the amounts of these loans are amounts that they are similar amounts, aren't they, to amounts that might be given to somebody by way of grant?
They are.
Was there any guidance or any policy which set out how the trustees determined whether or not something was given as a grant or given as a loan?
To the best of my knowledge, there was no policy. There would have been a discussion at trustee board level. It might have been that the original approach from a social worker or the registrant themselves suggested they would like it as a loan and they would like to repay it. Or it might have been that the trustees decided that it would be best to, for example, if you look at the 4775 one, to do with a car purchase. I think it likely that there was no motability element through which that person would have got a car. She would have clearly needed a car, and so she would have applied probably for a grant, a reg pay advance that she would have repaid through reg pay in order to obtain a car. I have to say this is supposition and recollection, I'm not certain. But very often the idea of a loan related to reg pay came from the registrant themselves or the registrant in discussion with a social worker.
The inquiries received evidence from those that have made applications, and there's been confusion as to the circumstances in which a loan or a grant has been given. There's a lack of clarity as to when either one or the other is given by the trustees. Is that something that you were aware of when you were at the Macfarlane Trust, that registrants didn't understand the decision-making process in respect of loans?
I don't think from this standpoint of time I can recollect either, but these would all have gone to the trustee board and they would have considered the elements. And certainly in some cases the suggestion or the request would have come direct from the registrant that they were asking for a loan, they weren't asking for a grant. That you've just said that could have been a misunderstanding on the part of the registrant. I can't really comment on that.
No, I'm not suggesting that if somebody asked for a loan by mistake. I'm suggesting that when people got the results of their applications back, it wasn't clear to them. They didn't understand why. Sometimes they were given a grant and sometimes they were given a loan.
I think without specific examples, I can't answer that.
I'm going to ask you some questions now about the partnership group.
Yes.
I understand from documentation and your witness statement that this came out of the strategic review. Is that right?
No, there was a partnership group that existed in some form before that. I'm not quite sure how it arose, but certainly it arose during my tenure. It was an opportunity for the registrants to meet the staff, and in the early stages there were representatives from certain groups of registrants, and it was so that they could exchange views with the trust on certain matters. And what happened was that, I think there's a phrase somewhere about it growing like topsy, so that all manner of people felt that they should they should come. And indeed, I think probably at the point of the start of the strategic review, we recognised, we more or less threw it open at one stage, and the numbers became too great to deal with. And following the strategic review, the strategic response group recommended that we form a new partnership group with specific representation from particular areas of registrants and others. That's my recollection.
So if we look, Shemek, at MACF 5088_028. It's a meeting of the partnership group, notes of a meeting held on the 23rd of September 1999, and you were attending that meeting. And then if we go halfway down the page, notes of a meeting held on the 14th of May 1999, issues arising in response to the notice of the first meeting included, first meeting. So do you understand from that the reconstituted partnership group after the strategic review started meeting on the first meeting was the 14th of May 1999? Does that sound right?
That is certainly what is suggested
yes. There. Does that sound right to you?
I'm not sure whether this is when it was entitled and had a different representation, the new partnership group, or whether this was a partnership group that came in before that.
It may be, if we go over the page to page 2, it may help. Matters arising under further at the bottom of the page, membership and representation. The issue of the role of the group and its remit was discussed at some length, and it was agreed that whilst members recognised the need for more formal user involvement in the Macfarlane Trust, the partnership group had been set up as a means of response to those recommendations in the strategic review that required multi-agency participation in implementation. And then if we go over to page 3, we can see the recommendations for the makeup of the group. After considerable discussion, it was agreed to recommend that the group be made up as follows, and it sets out the different representative categories of those in the group. And then it says it was agreed that Anne and Fran would identify and invite women to fill the role of partners and positive women. Does that prompt your memory?
It prompts my memory that this was, I think this was a group that was formed after the strategic review, because it refers to the strategic response group. And I think that came understood to be known as the new partnership group. I believe there was a group before that. My recollection is that there was a group before that, and that group became too large and unrepresentative of all constituents. That's my recollection. I'm sorry if I can't be more specific than that.
What was your...
Certainly this was the partnership group, in inverted commas, new partnership group, that arose when I think it became amalgamated, but with the strategic response group.
And what's your recollection of how the partnership group functioned, and the advantages or disadvantages to the trust in having this group?
Well, the advantages to the trust was the aim was better representation of the views of registrants themselves. And certainly the encouragement of representatives groups putting forward their views of how the trust worked and how it worked to meet their needs was what was being aimed at.
And was it successful in your view?
I think it was. I'm not sure whether it ever joined with or was part of the actual conference's working party. but certainly the organisation of conferences was, from my recollection, a part of the role of the partnership group, and in making it possible for different groups of registrants to meet and share experiences and identify needs was a significant part of what the group did. I believe that when it was more involved with other organisations, and when the group met with the hepatitis C groups as well, the original value to some of the registrants was felt to be watered down and membership decreased. I'm afraid this is from recollection. The original aim changed over the period of the lifetime of the partnership group or groups.
And was the response to that to then separate out the group so that those outside agencies would still meet with the Macfarlane Trust, but not within the context of the partnership group?
Not within my tenure.
I'm going to ask you some questions now about user trustees. I understand from your witness statement, is this right, that at the time that you began employment at the Macfarlane Trust, there was not a user trustee in place, because at that stage the Charity Commission guidance suggested that that was not appropriate for a grant-giving charity?
Yes, that was the case.
And that you were involved in the Charity Commission's process at re-looking at that
Yes.
guidance, and that the Charity Commission guidance changed at some point during your tenure.
Yes.
Were you enthusiastic about user trustees?
Definitely.
Why?
But I'd worked with them before and seen the value to the balance of the trustee board, and felt that it was a very effective way of the whole trustee board being able to more clearly understand and respond to the need of the registrants.
So you've given, in your evidence this morning, you were describing that there were people on the board already who suffered, or who were people on the board already with haemophilia, albeit they weren't user trustees.
Yes.
So there was a degree of knowledge already, but the way you've described the board, particularly when you arrived, did you particularly think that this board could do with user trustees? So it's not a very elegantly put question, but
I understand that in the early life of the trust there had been a user or user trustees on the board, and then certainly the Charity Commission guidance changed, and also I think that some of the other trustees felt that it was difficult, and particularly where money was being spoken of, it was difficult. And there had been, I think it had been quite welcomed by the trustee board when they could no longer appoint user trustees. However, as the guidance changed, we did introduce user trustees again.
was that something that you particularly pushed for then, in light of the lukewarm view of the existing trustees to user trustees?
Yes, it was. It was because I came from a background where user trustees had been people who used the services of the charity rather than received money from the charity. Now, and that was, I think, the Charity Commission distinction, which enabled the user trustees not to be continued with. As I recall, the discussions with the Charity Commission were based on the fact that actually there is not a significant difference between giving someone a grant to obtain a service and providing the service directly through the charity. And that the benefit of users was, as I've said, to enable the trustee board to take a balanced and more clearly understanding view of the, in their terms, the beneficiaries.
The documents show that there was an advertisement put in the newsletter at Christmas 2000. Does that accord with your recollection in terms of the time frame?
Yes, it does.
And was there sufficient interest from the registrant community to take up that post, take up those roles?
Yes.
It was something, was it, that the registrant community, the beneficiary community, welcomed and thought was a good idea?
Yes, I think so. This was advertised through the Hemophilia Society, and I think it could have been in our handbook, but the Hemophilia Society was to be responsible for actually nominating those user trustees.
And what was the attitude of the existing trustees to that? Were they reluctant, welcoming?
I think they were, what's the word? I think they were doubtful because they saw a major part of their work as being connected with money, and they didn't think it right that user trustees should be involved in any discussions about distribution of the funds. Now, it had been understood from the outset of proposing user trustees that they would not be involved in the allocations of grants part of the meeting, because that would be creating for them a conflict of interest.
Given how important funding decisions generally were to the trust, do you think, is there a sense in which the user trustees were second-class trustees, kept out of some of the decisions? Did you get a feel for that?
I think the user trustees, from my recollection, the user trustees agreed that it would not be appropriate for them to be discussing detailed grant applications on behalf of other registrants. I think where wider policy in areas came in, like whether we should apply for more money from the Department of Health or particular projects like the bereavement project, they would have been involved in the discussion. It was personal payments to individuals that they obviously would know.
And did you get any sense, or did you see anything that might suggest that as user trustees they were in some way second-class citizens, if I can put it that way, on the trustee board?
I don't think so whilst I was there, no.
And what's your recollection of, well, if the aim was to bring something new to the board, a different perspective, some balance, what's your recollection of how that played out?
I think some were suspicious of it and others welcomed it. I can't be specific.
Do you recall any discussion about trying to ensure that different communities of registrants would be represented on the board as through user trustees? For example, if I can put it this way, primary beneficiaries, the infected person with haemophilia, the widow community, for example, was thought given to that? No. And what is your understanding of the definition of a user trustee? Is it someone that uses the services of the charity, or can it be wider than that and include, for example, a family member who isn't a beneficiary of the charity, but could be?
User trustees would have implied that they would have been a beneficiary of payments from the trust.
We heard evidence yesterday, moving on to a new topic now, we heard evidence yesterday from Peter Stevens, heard evidence yesterday from Peter Stevens about emails passing between him and Mr. Clark, another of the trustees on the board, in which Mr. Clark described some or all of the registrants as the great unwashed. Do you recall being informed about the existence of those emails at a meeting with the Birchgrove board in a hotel prior to a partnership group meeting?
No, I don't.
Do you have any recollection of those emails and the fact that they existed?
I don't have any recollection of knowing of their existence.
I'm going to ask you some questions now about the Macfarlane Trust's relationship with government, and in particular the Department of Health.
Let me just ask a question, if I may.
Yes.
To what extent does that use of that phrase by that person in that email surprise you?
It does surprise me.
Thank you.
It also distresses me.
Did the Macfarlane Trust have regular meetings with the Department of Health during your tenure?
Yes.
And did the Eileen Trust also have regular meetings with the Department of Health?
It is my recollection that they were usually part of the same meeting, but we simply stopped talking about the Macfarlane Trust and moved on to the Eileen Trust.
And can you recall how frequently those meetings took place?
I understand from all the papers that I've read that it was quarterly. My recollection is that it may not have been quite so frequent.
And who would they typically be attended by? Who would go to those meetings?
Almost certainly the chairman and myself, and occasionally the finance officer, and occasionally the treasurer. But usually the chairman and myself.
And for the Department of Health, would be attended by civil servants from the Blood Policy
Unit?
Unit?
It would be a nominated person, which changed over the time that I was there.
And were those meetings all minuted?
Oh yes, by the Department of Health.
And was it standard practice for the Macfarlane Trust to get a copy of those minutes afterwards?
Yes.
So would you expect the Macfarlane Trust to hold a full, or pretty much full, copy of the minutes of all of those meetings with the Department of Health?
Yes.
I'm just going to read out a very short part of your witness statement to you, and if you want it up on screen, then we can of course do that. But you, in your witness statement, you're in fact talking about the Eileen Trust, and you're talking about whether or not the Eileen Trust could have done more to advertise its existence, which is something we'll come on to in a moment. But you say this. You say it wasn't the role of the trust to advertise and promote or campaign in any way. And it's this part I just wanted to get your views on. We simply administered the fund that the Department of Health had given to us. We had no independent existence as an organisation or a charity. In common parlance, we were a quango, carrying out work on behalf of the DOH. As I have explained above, the Macfarlane Trust had been set up to administer a government fund and nothing more. Is that how you recall and how you saw the relationship between the Macfarlane Trust and the Department of Health?
I should say that I obviously, when I stated that in my witness statement, I overlooked the fact that we were a charity. Having worked in charities for a large part of my life before that, this was a very different setup, which is why I used the word wanker. I certainly think that the trustee board, when I joined, very much felt that we were administering a fund that had been provided by government through the Department of Health.
And did that attitude come through then in how they, in the information that they expected from the McFarlane Trust? Did they expect you to report to them with your spending plans and so on?
We used to discuss a budget every year. We used to seek project funding for particular activities that might have fallen outside the particular budget year or spending plan, like, for example, both the reviews and, like, for example, the assistance with bringing our computerized systems up to date, and later getting new computers again because of what was perceived then as the Y2K problem. So there were areas that fell outside what we had discussed in the budget preparation meetings, yes. And so we would have presented a project application to them. But we certainly primarily saw them as our main source of funding, our only source of funding, except for investment. Did the McFarlane Trust have to effectively seek the approval of the Department of Health for their policies and spending plans? Not sure about approval as such. What we had to do was to prepare and present a budget, a financial plan. And then that would go through to the relevant part of the department, and they would approve it. And I don't remember them ever not approving it. There might have been a delay in payment.
So when you say that the DOH certainly in the early years felt that you were administering a fund that had been provided by the government, why did you come to that view? How did that show itself in their conduct?
I don't think it was necessarily the Department of Health that held that view. It was certainly the trustee interpretation of the Department of Health's view.
And so the trustees' attitude to the Department of Health was to seek approval, was it, of particular policies, to run things past them, to make sure that the Department of Health didn't have any difficulty with the approach they were taking and so on? Was that the general approach of the trustees?
I wouldn't have said so. It was very much having a discussion meeting, which was minuted, at which we brought up, for example, the changing need of registrant post-1997, or the need for a 10-year review, or in later a 15-year review, that kind of thing. They didn't agree or disagree policy areas. When we were making loans, we certainly sought the approval of the department to do that, and their legal department said, yes, this is okay. I don't recall, and I wasn't there when the first equity loan arrangements were made, so I don't know whether that was floated past the department or not. Yes, we provided information. They asked questions. I don't believe they ever made any policy guidelines or commented on our policies. So from that aspect, we were an independent charity. But we were also fulfilling their direction.
Fulfilling their direction? What do you mean by that?
Spending the funds that were allocated, and their direction was that they wanted regular reports on the activities of the trust.
And was there ever... Sorry.
Those took place in meetings with them. Sorry.
And was there ever... did you ever encounter any... the department... I think you said they didn't agree or disagree with policies. Is that right? They didn't comment on or
I
have
don't
input
recall
into.
them.
They didn't have any input into any of the policies that Macfarlane drew up or applied.
I don't think so.
The inquiry has seen minutes of board meetings, and certainly at least one during your tenure, which we can go to if it's helpful, but where Macfarlane Trust board minutes where Department of Health official or civil servants have attended. Do you have a recollection of that happening during your tenure?
Was that Zubaydah Malik?
Let me find it. It's MACF 5011 _003. It's Mr. Robert Finch.
Yes, I do recall Robert Finch attending. I don't recall the context of why he was there, but there was certainly no reason why from time to time one might not have joined our meetings.
Yeah, so we can see there 28th of May 2002, and you can see there Mr. Finch in attendance.
Yes, there certainly was a period, and it could have been about then, when we had a finance trainee from the department join us on a 6-month secondment. It could have been that Robert Finch was connected with that, but I can't recall the detail.
So you say there's no reason why Department of Health couldn't attend board meetings. What was the benefit of that attendance?
I can only assume that they wanted a different viewpoint of what was taking place in the trust at the time.
And
I cannot remember, I'm afraid.
And do you recall whether the Department of Health got the minutes of the Macfarlane Trust board meetings as a matter of course?
No, I don't believe they did.
I'm going to move to a new topic now. Shamik, can we have DHSC 304101 _048? This is a letter dated the 29th of August 2003. Can't find my copy. From Dr. Hay to you. And he says, I'm very grateful to you for sending us your list of patients with haemophilia who have died and who are HIV positive. So that we could reconcile with the National Haemophilia Database and identify any potential discrepancies. And then he goes on to say what he found, that the database had not been notified of 16 deaths, and they've amended their records. And in 2 cases registered with Macfarlane Trust, there was they hadn't been notified, that the UKHCDO hadn't been notified that they had HIV, and then goes on to look at the circumstances of those 2 cases. And then picking up towards the end of that paragraph, when we examined your results, we found that we had records of 70 HIV positive patients who are dead, but who do not appear in your list. Presumably either they or their relatives did not register with the Macfarlane Trust, or possibly they died before the trust was created, and then sets out some details of those 70 patients. And then we can see your response on the 4th of September 2003, which Schumacher is HCDMO 40612 underscore 003. This is your letter in response, 4th of September. Dear Dr. Hay, and you thank him in the first paragraph, and a discussion about the two patients who may or may not be HIV positive. And then the paragraph starting, it would also be very useful to have names of the 70 deceased patients not recorded on the Trust's database. This is a large number of people not to be recorded, and we need to investigate why and try to trace their families. Even if these patients died before the Trust was set up, payments should have been made by the government to their families. We will certainly pursue the matter on their behalf. Now,
I think perhaps the emphasis there might be should have been made by government to their families, as opposed to should have been made. The sense I get from this is that the patients themselves wouldn't have got the money, but their families were entitled to under the deed.
Yes.
Now, a couple of issues arising from this. This is dated the 4th of September. You leave the Trust sort of 6 or 7 weeks later. Can you recall what, if anything, you did in response to the tracing of those 70 families?
I would certainly have made Peter Stevens aware of it. The extent to which I would have delegated action to one of the members of staff, I cannot at this stage recall. Our means of knowing about registrants of the Trust were passed to us by the Department of Health, and most often through the actual haemophilia centres. So I am surprised that it's a very large number. I'm very surprised that Dr. Hay didn't apparently know about it, about some of them. It obviously should have been followed up, and I hope it was. But at that time, there was a great deal going on in the Macfarlane Trust, and I probably didn't put that as a priority. Peter certainly would have known about it.
And was there a concern at Macfarlane that given that there were so many, was a relatively large number of individuals who had never registered, that there may still be some individuals out there who weren't registered? Was that something that the Trust considered?
It is a possibility. I would be very sorry if there were children who had been infected and had, or indeed widows who had been infected who had not benefited in any way from the Trust.
I'm going to ask you.
I see that this is copied to Peter, so he would have known about it, and also Mark Winter. And Mark might have had an idea of how we could pursue this.
I'm going to ask you a handful of questions now about the Eileen Trust and then the Hemophilia Society. Can we look, Seamus, at EILN 5016 underscore 052. This is the Eileen Trust annual report from 2002. I just want to get an idea of the numbers of registrants during your employment with the Eileen Trust. So if we can go to page 2 of that document, please. And under the Trust's operations, the Trust provides assistance to 10 registrants, 4 of whom are single, to 2 people who were infected by their spouses who had been registrants before their deaths, and to 2 children who were infected in utero. Assistance is also given to 9 families of deceased registrants, Within all these groups, there are 12 children aged 18 or under, and a further 5 young people up to 25 years old who could receive financial help from the Trust. 4 of those 17 young persons are orphans. Including in these numbers are 3 who became newly registered with the Trust in the course of the year. There is 1 further registrant, also below the age of 25, with whom the Trust has been unable to establish contact for several years. And then towards the bottom of that page, where it says financial help continues to be given in 3 forms, and we see their regular payments are made monthly to 25 individuals or families. And then over the page, single payments are made in response to a specific request for help, and we see halfway down that paragraph, during the year 69 individual grants were made, varying in size from 1,000 to 5,790, and then the paragraph after that, winter payments, which are in effect supplements to regular payments, were made during the year, 12 of those in total. So that was in 2002. Did the numbers broadly stay the same during your tenure?
Yes, I think it likely that perhaps 1 or 2 new registrants were found during that time, but I cannot recall the detail.
In your statement, is it right to understand that the numbers of those that registered with the Eileen Trust were lower than the Department of Health had anticipated? Is that your understanding?
Yes, I think it likely, yes.
And in your witness statement, you suggest, you speak about some of the reasons for that, in particular that people may not know that they are infected with hepatitis C via contaminated blood, and equally, even if that's the case, they may not know about the Eileen Trust. Can I take you to a document which perhaps throws up another reason? Can we go to EILN 609_011? So this is a letter dated the 16th of March 1998, and if we go to the second page, we can see it's a letter from you. And if we go back to the first page, we can see it's to Derek Dudley from the NHS Executive, and you say, as you know, we receive all information about the Eileen Trust members from the department, and not all of those who have received a payment from the department chose to get in touch with the Trust. You then say, the penultimate paragraph of that page, whilst the Department of Health may have made payments to other people since 1995, we have only registered 3 since that time. So you will need to check to see how accurate our figures are now. So is it right that there were people that received capital payments from the Department of Health who never registered with the Eileen Trust to receive any further payments?
Yes, that is right.
And you never had their details because they were never passed on to you by the Department of Health?
Yes, that's correct.
And do you know can you recall whether any action was taken after you sent that letter, whether the Department of Health made an attempt to contact those people to check whether or not they wanted to get in touch with the Eileen Trust?
I'm afraid I don't know. I don't think we checked, that they checked. I think it's important that whilst everyone who became infected with HIV through blood products felt greatly and deeply sensitive about the infection, some of them, both in the Eileen Trust community and indeed in the McFarlane Trust community, particularly widows, felt that the stigma of HIV was so great that they did not want any further links. And I'm not sure today whether that is still the case, but it certainly was the case at the stage that I joined. There was a great sensitivity about the stigma related at that time to HIV. I also think that, as it says somewhere in all the papers, it would have taken an alert hematologist in a hospital when someone was diagnosed with HIV to relate it in any way to their treatment, either by large blood transfusion or tissue transfer. It wasn't something that would have immediately come to mind of medical practitioners, because there were a range of other ways in which people could have been infected with HIV. And I think it's important to remember that the responsibility of the Department of Health to make haematology departments keenly aware, and the whole medical profession aware, that when somebody came to them and was identified as being HIV positive, that their background was explored if it wasn't immediately obvious.
Shemit, you can take that down. Can we put up CGRA 40852? You can see this is a letter from you on the 28th of November, and it's to a registrant of the Eileen Trust. And I just wanted to take your draw your attention to the big paragraph starting Charles Lister, while contacted DOH, has just been in touch with me to say their legal department have advised that because you became infected with HIV in Scotland, in order to receive the second payment from the Macfarlane Special Payments Number 2 Trust, so that's the capital payment, is it, from the government in respect of his the HIV infection. The undertaking you would be asked to sign would be the Scottish undertaking, not the English one. And then you say at the bottom of that paragraph, you will be entitled to £23,500 that you would have received in 1991 had you known about the trust at the time. So is this right, that throughout your time at the Eileen Trust up until 2003, any new registrants coming onto the scheme, the Eileen Trust scheme, still had to sign the waiver that was being signed by registrants in 1991 in exactly the same terms? Is that
Yes.
correct? So for those under the English scheme, they were still having to sign a waiver, were they, that included not only HIV but hepatitis C?
That is my recollection, yes.
Just to be clear for the transcript, that's the 28th of November 2000. You didn't give the year.
Yes, 20th of November 2000.
Anyone who looks at the document will see it, but for those who don't have access to the document, that's the date.
Yes. Peter Stevens gave some evidence about the Eileen Trust yesterday, and he said two things. He said, first of all, that it was run like a mini Macfarlane Trust, and secondly, he said that he regretted not identifying earlier the differences between the two trusts. And I wondered whether or not you would agree that the Eileen Trust was run like a mini Macfarlane Trust.
I think we certainly based the level of grants on the Macfarlane Trust grants. There were areas where people in the Eileen Trust were invited to join the Macfarlane Trust in things like the bereavement project. There were major differences, obviously, in that the Macfarlane registrants had no nothing in common to link them, except the fact that they had received infected blood and as a result had become HIV.
Do you mean the
Positive.
Eileen Trust residents?
I mean the Eileen Trust, yes, whereas the Macfarlane Trust had, well, two things that immediately come to mind. They would have been known to their Hemophilia Centre, probably from birth or quite soon after. They would have had the benefit of the Hemophilia Society as a body that campaigned actively for help for them. And they would have had the benefit of being able to communicate with each other easily. That was not the case with the Eileen Trust at all.
Is this fair that the given this, because the Eileen Trust was so small, and in part because of the work of Susan Daniels, who knew the registrants so well, the Eileen Trust could be proactive with its registrants in a way that the Macfarlane Trust wasn't. They could suggest ways of meeting needs before the registrants even had to ask for them.
You don't have an example of that?
I could, yes, we could go to just EILN EILN 5021_114. So this is a letter dated the 1st of October 2003, and it's a letter from you. And it seems to be the Eileen Trust getting in touch with somebody on the cusp of adulthood to explain to them how services or how funding might change, and suggesting different ways that need could be met. So makes a reference to the existing monthly payment, and suggests making grants connected with education, computer, college books, etc., and then suggesting perhaps that a doctor might feel that a respite break would be appropriate, and explaining how to do that and what could be given by the trust, and then explaining what happens when the registrant turns 18 in terms of the regular payments, and then makes an offer about non-financial support and how that can be offered.
Yes. Yes, certainly we did do that because, yes, it was a small trust, but also because the haemophilia centres and their support staff, the nurses, etc., would have been in a position to support those registrants of the Macfarlane Trust, whereas there was no such obvious support organisation for the members of the Eileen Trust. So yes, we were in a position to be able to look into somebody's situation like this young man.
I'm going to ask you a handful of questions now about your time at the Hemophilia Society. Can you tell us how it was that you came to be appointed as a trustee of the Hemophilia Society?
Well, I'd obviously known about the society for as long as I've been in the Macfarlane Trust. I'm not sure at what point I actually joined as a member. I worked with Karen Pappenheim over a period of some years when we were becoming more strongly aware of the number of people with haemophilia who had contracted hepatitis C but were not members of the Macfarlane Trust. And we did some work together, we knew each other, we used to meet regularly. And at some stage, when I knew that I was imminently going to leave the Macfarlane Trust, during a conversation, I simply said, I wonder if I could join the board of the Hemophilia Society. Really, it was just putting out feelers to see, because I obviously don't have haemophilia and none of my family do, whether I would be a relevant applicant to become a trustee. And Karen was enthusiastic about the idea, and I think my name was put forward. And that's how it happened.
You say in your witness statement that you found the Haemophilia Society a much more sympathetic board than the Macfarlane Trust board. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, virtually all of the Haemophilia Society board were people with haemophilia. And they had obviously experienced all aspects of the disease, knew all about those with HIV and those who didn't have it, knew all about, from experience, what it was like to have a child diagnosed with haemophilia and there was no explanation for it, which sometimes happened. All about the stresses of being a parent and very much the stresses of being a child growing up in the era before Factor VIII, when the treatment had been quite difficult and painful, and the bleeds had caused quite severe disabilities and lasting disability into life. So that they understood the registrant group, not the registrant group, the membership group of the Haemophilia Society in a much more practical and experienced way than all the members of the Macfarlane Trust Board.
You said in your statement that you don't know anything about the background to the Haemophilia Society that predates your trusteeship. Is that right?
I knew that the Haemophilia Society had been founded by parents a long time before.
But in terms of their policies and their thinking about various different issues,
no, I didn't. I mean, obviously, I knew that they had lobbied and eventually got the recognition which resulted in the Macfarlane Trust. I knew that we were currently lobbying about the situation of people with haemophilia who had got hepatitis C through their treatment and were now becoming very seriously ill. And I knew that they were a campaigning organisation.
Do you know why, when the Haemophilia Society was campaigning for compensation for those with hepatitis C, why those with hepatitis B were excluded?
I don't, because I don't know how widespread infection with hepatitis B resulted from treatment at all. It wasn't something that we greatly recognised.
You say in your witness statement that you formed the impression that the focus of the Haemophilia Society was on young children, and that those with HIV were perceived to be provided for by the Macfarlane Trust. Can you tell us how you gained that impression?
Simply through the agenda for board meetings and what we discussed as trustees. We certainly recognised that the Macfarlane Trust had been set up with a specific objective to help those with haemophilia who contracted HIV, and so it wouldn't be that there was no longer an interest in those people, it would just be that there were other priorities. And in particular at that time it would be children and newly identified parents.
When the Haemophilia Society was involved in the work around getting an inquiry up and running, do you know whether there were any concerns expressed by the Haemophilia Society about the fact that the Archer inquiry was a non-statutory inquiry? Is that something you recall being discussed?
I don't recall it being discussed. No, I'm afraid not.
And equally, do you recall any discussions about about the remit of the Archer inquiry and whether or not that was too narrow.
I think we did believe it was too narrow at the time, but I think we also accepted that it was a step in the right direction.
Final document from me is BART 302260. This is an information fact sheet dated September 2004 from the Hemophilia Society about VCJD. Now, I'm not going to ask you about the contents of this, just some general questions. This is a information fact sheet for the membership, presumably, is it?
Yes, it is.
Are you able to tell us anything about the process that was undertaken by the Society when it published medical information for its membership at the time that you were there? So in particular, are you able to tell us how the Society went about obtaining medical information and from whom?
It's my recollection that we had a medical advisory panel and that they would have advised us on all emerging aspects related to haemophilia, in particular this kind of incident where something had arisen which we felt it might be necessary to warn the members of the Society about. And you'll see that it goes on to explain why this had a relevance to the membership of the Society. And I don't know whether any people with haemophilia actually contracted CJD or not. But it would have been up to our medical advisory panel to advise that this is something that, in their view, the whole membership needed to know about.
Do you know whether the information and advice sought by the Hemophilia Society was restricted to those on the medical advisory panel?
No, I'm sure it wasn't. Obviously, centre directors, who could have all been on that panel, but I cannot recall, they would have very much fed information in to us. The World Federation of Haemophilia had a congress every 4 years at which a great deal of medical information was shared amongst the haemophilia community throughout the world. I'm quite sure that the Society would have been very alert to all matters related to new treatments, whatever was happening in the treatment world. And obviously, from time to time, there were new drugs introduced, and it would be up to the centre directors to let us know what their value was, and if we felt it was right, we would have probably spread that knowledge. No, it wouldn't have been limited to the medical advisory panel, but that is certainly the first place we would have referred to.
And do you know what the process was in terms of contacting the medical advisory panel? Was it everybody on the panel was contacted, or particular individuals were cherry-picked because of their knowledge or for any other reason?
I don't know for certain, but I would imagine that Karen Pappenheim, as chief executive, would have been asked by the trustees to contact the panel or the chair of the panel about a particular issue and sought some more information from them.
And do you know how, or indeed whether, the information that the Society received was checked or verified?
Who would you ask us to check with? Because that's why we had a medical advisory panel.
So the process would be, if information came in from the medical advisory panel, the Haemophilia Society would accept that without further processes.
They might have had conversations with centre directors, for example, but the level of standing of the panel was such that, yes, we would have accepted the advice that they gave.
One question that I omitted to ask you in relation to the Eileen Trust, and it's this. Do you recall, during your time at the Eileen Trust, the Society seeking appointment of trustees to the Eileen Trust?
Yes, indeed, to both trusts.
Did you understand why the Society sought trustees on the board of the Eileen Trust, given that the beneficiaries or registrants from the Eileen Trust were not people with haemophilia by definition?
I think they felt that the Department of Health might find it easier to recruit trustees if they'd be prepared to serve on both trusts. There was not a flood of applicants when the department sought to identify and recruit trustees for either trust.
So those are my questions. Would it be convenient to take a break now so that call participants can submit any further questions they seek me
yes, of
to
course.
ask?
What we'll do is we'll take a break for half an hour. What normally happens at this stage is that Council checks to see what questions, if any, those who are core participants would wish to be asked on their behalf, and she'll return with further questions now at 3:45. So
Can I just ask something?
Yes, certainly.
There is an area that I would like to speak about that I didn't develop in my witness statement. Would there be scope for this to happen?
Yes, there will be. Our practice is that every witness, whatever their background, whoever they are, is invited at the conclusion of the questioning to say anything they wish to say. And if any questions arise out of that, they can be asked later on in writing. I have no doubt. But so you must feel absolutely free to say whatever you would wish at the conclusion of the questioning.
Thank you.
3:45.